What is up, everyone? I'm Jeff Lund, and this is the Mediocre Alaskan Podcast. A couple months ago, I started listening to the Right to Roam podcast out of Wyoming, which I really liked because the guys have biology backgrounds. So it's not just a hunting and fishing podcast with some anecdotes. It's got a lot of science involved with it. And so it's different than just your typical hunting and fishing and outdoors type podcast. We really liked that and was happy to have Lee and Adam on here. So we're going to talk about social norms and being a good guest when we go to different states. Talk about how you earn your local status and how long that takes. Also talk about figuring out the regulations in different states, doing your due diligence. That is all coming up here in episode 85. Make sure you check out the mediocrealaskan.com for content. And here we go with Lee and Adam from the Right to Roam podcast. So, Lee, Adam, Right to Roam podcast, guys. Can you give me a little introduction here, and then we'll get rolling? Doing a little different state, the least populated state and the second least populated state, with the commonality of liking the outdoors. So give me a little background, why you guys started the podcast, and we'll go from there.
Well, in full disclosure, there's only half of us here, right, Lee?
The better half.
The better half, there we go. Well, I was born in western Nebraska. This is Adam. Raised in Cody, Wyoming from age 7 until my wife and I left to move to Buffalo almost 12 years ago. I grew up in a hunting family, so hunting and fishing and trapping and gardening, all of that has always been a part of my life. Initially, secondary education involved pursuing a wildlife biology degree, and I found out that I enjoyed the funner aspects of college more than the academic aspects of college.
It happened.
Yeah, it happens. and very quickly switched to a history education degree with an English and economics minor and an additional background there. And, my entire life I've had an appreciation for the finer parts of conservation and what hunting and fishing and responsible use and multiple use really means. But was fortunate enough through Chris, one of our co-hosts, to be introduced to Lee and Sam, and then maybe that's probably a good spot for me to stop talking and let Lee take over.
Yeah, so I'm Lee Knox. I give a rundown similar to Adam. Born in West Texas, moved to Wyoming when I was 13, to southwestern Wyoming. That was a big deal. Overall, grew up in a strong hunting family, both sides of my family, so never really had a choice. The only difference being that in Texas, hunting big game was expensive, so we mainly stuck to dove, quail, and pheasants. And we didn't even own a rifle when we moved to Wyoming. Of course, you hit Wyoming and all the public land and all the opportunities and the amount of tags you can get. It took off quickly from there. I got a wildlife degree from the University of Wyoming, and then spent 7 years doing various seasonal work. It takes a long time to get a permanent wildlife job, especially if you don't get a master's. And even with the master's now, it seems to be taking about just as long. But got to work on the seasonal jobs are some of the funnest stuff out there because it's all the field work without the paperwork. And it's just constantly changing. So I got to work everything from grizzly bears, swans, black-footed ferrets, swift fox. And anyway, that all led to a career with the Game and Fish, and I'm currently a wildlife biologist for the Wyoming Game and Fish, and live in southeastern Wyoming. The podcast kind of came about. It was a general agreement, I guess, between me and Chris, and then picking up Adam and Sam. I've known Sam and Chris since college, both being wildlife biologists, and just talking to them, the podcast world seemed to be lacking the knowledge base of just most wildlife biology topics. And you listen to these other podcasts, and not to their fault, it's just not their background, that they'd be interviewing these folks and just not asking the right questions or getting to the right getting the right facts out there and just being frustrated that and not that we're phenomenal biologists, but we know a lot of them. And as a group of specialists, we're really bad about getting our information to the public. So it was kind of twofold. We felt like we needed to get more information out to the public, and we needed to help our cohorts find a way to do that was easily digestible, less scientific, more common speak.
Yes. Well, I think that most of what's out there in the podcast and even writing form is emotional observation, which is different than actual fact. And one of the things that you guys have on your website there, and you start your podcast off with people being entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. So what are some of the most common things that you find or discover with regards to the wrong facts or non-applicable facts, or things that just there's no scientific evidence to support? It's just emotional observation, which, fluctuates and is based on a very limited observation.
Well, we also like to say that there's a fine line between anecdote and fact. And sometimes that line gets really blurry depending on what's being talked about. Because you can't necessarily discount someone's experiences over 5, 10, 15, 20 years if they've been hunting the same drainage. They may know that drainage better than any professionally employed anyone, whether it's a game warden or a specific species biologist or a forester or whatever, just because when they are in the outdoors, that's the one place they go to. But just because their anecdote stacks up year after year doesn't mean that's necessarily repeatable on a landscape, from a landscape perspective. And that's really, for me, as the 25% of the podcast that isn't professionally employed and or trained as a biologist, that's where the validity of what we're trying to do really stands out. We don't want to discount what people have experienced, but we don't want that to carry seemingly the amount of weight that it does when it comes to policy decisions, when it comes to management decisions.
Right.
It seems to increase, or emotions seem to increase with the level of the species. People don't seem to get, well, it's not completely true. Walleye fishermen seem to get very emotional about walleye, but overall, nobody seems to get that worked up about fish. You get some pretty hardcore waterfowl hunters, but it's really when you get up into either trophy management and really predator management, where a lot of emotion comes into play and the facts kind of go out the window. Because I don't fully know why it gets more difficult the higher in the trophic level you go.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that it's people who, it doesn't really matter which way it is, but are there a lot of hunters that adopt their own facts, or is a lot of the non-hunters that are repeating things that aren't true about managing resources? Do you find one is more passionate but wrong than other, or is it kind of a 50-50, or does it depend on the topic?
Yeah, which way's the wind blowing that day?
Yeah, I don't think it's specific to any one group. It's people want to find facts to back up their own theory, or find information. Whether if you go to the bar and somebody tells you something that sounds good, that boosts your own theory that you were already building, then there you go, you run with it.
Has there been something that you guys have kind of discovered that it was totally opposite of what you expected, but then you had to confront the facts? Because I think it's easy for us to say, well, you need to listen, you need to look at the facts. But there have been a couple of times where I've been confronted by things and thought, whoa, I thought it was something different, and now I have to exercise what I'm hoping other people do. And has there been something that you thought was totally different and you had to kind of accept the fact that was something maybe you didn't expect?
Unless Adam has something off the top of his head, I think this is something a lot of people don't fully understand. That that's the whole basis behind the scientific method is like you're constantly going to be proven wrong, and being proven wrong is fine. Like it's great. Like I'm completely okay with it. But so you make your decisions based off the best information you have at the time. And if new information comes out that just like proves you were totally doing it wrong, like as a biologist, I have no problem going to where the data is pointing. But I think it's difficult to explain that to the public because it's like, you've been screwing this up. And it's like, well, we're trying to use the best information we got. And as better technology comes out, just things improve, you just find out stuff you didn't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but that's the best part about research and information is it allows you to improve on what you previously thought.
And I'd have to echo that quite a bit, just from the standpoint that I've been able to come to this more from the general public's perspective than because Lee and Chris and Sam have had kind of the behind the scenes perspective based on their employment, so there's been several moments where I've had, wow, I didn't, that information was never conveyed to me, or why wasn't that information ever conveyed this way, or because when you're having these conversations with folks like Andrew Jakes or Dan Thompson or Frank Van Manen, I mean, some of the folks we've been fortunate enough to have conversations with, and you're not getting the sound bites that get regurgitated and repeated either in newspaper or local radio or NPR or anything like that. You actually get a chance to sit down and hear the context of what those sound bites are coming out of, and you get to hear the ancillary explanation that lends some depth and some clarity to what is actually being done or why things are being done the way they are. So, for me personally, I feel like I'm a very fortunate general citizen because I'm getting to look behind the curtain and get a peek at the almighty and powerful Oz that everyone else likes to bitch and complain about.
So like I can't think of a personal example right now. But like a fairly good example was the grizzly bear when it was in Wyoming was, I'm gonna get the years wrong. Was it 2007? They were delisted for like a month or two.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Because I was working with Sam on the grizzly bear crew, and there was like a 2-month window to where we could have kept grizzly bear claws, and then it was over. It's the only reason I kind of remember that. But so that decision came about because there was a group of people that sued, and it ended up being looking into like, well, white bark pine is a serious food source of grizzly bears. Grizzly bears are on the endangered species list. They must not be doing well if this white bark pine is really important to them. And so the reason that white bark pine is important to certain subpopulations of grizzly bears, and so to explain that, white bark pine is in the family of 5-needle pines. In the Mountain West, at least in Wyoming, we have limber pine and white bark, and they have these massive seed crops. And there's grizzly bears will go up to those higher elevations where there's white bark pine and just gorge on seeds, just high protein, and it's typically late fall, right before they go into hibernation. There's other populations of those grizzly bears that they go into moth sites, and you can watch this on the Planet Earth video series, where there's just a whole pile of grizzly bears on a hillside rolling boulders, and their scat is nothing but exoskeletons from just eating moths, just very high protein, site specific. But anyway, what really came out when people started looking into it, like, yeah, white bark pine from disease. We had beetle outbreaks. I think most of the white bark pine was from like a blister rust. Lost a lot of mature trees. But it turns out grizzly bears are generalists. They figure it out. Like they can eat a lot of different food source, and it wasn't quite as important as everybody thought it was, or at least that certain segment.
Yeah, I happen to know one of the attorneys that filed that lawsuit very personally because I graduated high school with her, and that somewhat ended a friendship.
Yeah. How much do you see outside interests filing lawsuits or getting involved in things that are in Wyoming that maybe are lacking some of the evidence? That happens a lot in Alaska because people try to save Alaska on behalf of Alaskans, because they live somewhere else and they've seen what happens when there's no wolves, or they've seen what happened when public land goes private, and so they're trying to, on behalf of Alaskans, save our state for us when actually they don't have all the facts. How much outside money or outside influence do you see in Wyoming?
From a citizen standpoint, honestly, it's hard to answer that with any form of certainty because you never know what to believe in what's being presented. I mean, everyone's very quick to point fingers when something doesn't go the way they think it should be. And I'm sure Alaska and Wyoming share a fairly similar sociological root in that we're all pretty independent, we're all pretty self-reliant, but we also like to take care of our neighbors and friends. And we're not really big on quote-unquote outsiders moving in and trying to make our state like where they came from. So but then again, at the same time, some of the best people I know that are strong voices for responsible conservation and responsible multiple use, whether it's energy extraction or hunting and angling or agriculture, a lot of those voices are people that were not born or raised in this state. They moved here as adults or were brought here because of jobs. So one of the things that drives me nuts about that, and not to put your question on on point or anything, but the term outsiders. I mean, man, if someone's committing to pick up their family and relocate to Sheridan or Buffalo or Shoshone or Soldotna, Alaska, they're, whether it's short term or long term, they're investing themselves in that area. And I try to do my best to give the benefit of the doubt until they prove otherwise.
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plans shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
Right. Yeah, in Alaska, it's kind of the sourdough thing. So if you've been here for 1 year, there are people claim that, they've been coming up to Alaska every week for, 20 years, which means that if you've come up here in 7-day spurts for 20 years, that means that you've been here for a fraction of a year still. But once you've lived through a couple of years and you're kind of part of the community, it just changes you, and you get kind of a different opinion. You kind of see how things really do work, and so you see a change in some people as they kind of adopt it rather than I'm here to own Alaska, or I'm here to make money off Alaska, or this or that. And some people come up here and they're very respectful of it, and they kind of observe first rather than here I am, I'm going to dominate Alaska, I'm going to make money off
How do
the
the
resources.
locals view those folks?
It
I mean,
kind of
how do the people that are born and raised or second generation, third generation, fourth, fifth, so on, how do they view those folks that do set roots down and are there for 2 or 3 years? Because that's where, I look at Wyoming and, I will call myself a Wyomingite, and then someone says, oh, well, where were you born? I was born in northwestern Nebraska. Oh, so you're not a Wyomingite. No, I've only lived here for 32 years of my almost 38. So no, I guess not. So there's a lot of that too. That regardless of how long someone lives somewhere, there's still a pretty strong sense of localism or statism with folks that are first, second, third, fourth, fifth generation people, and they're not afraid to let you know it, which I find endearing too, because there's a lot of pride and there's a lot of reason to be proud.
I think the biggest thing I moved from Colorado when I was 5. My brother was 8, to Klawak, which is a town of 700 people, predominantly Tlingit, Native Alaskan. And my brother and I were 2 of like 3 blonde kids in the elementary schools, predominantly Native. But my dad was a music teacher, and he started the winter and the spring concert like right at 6 o'clock. And so when people were coming in late, they're like, "Whoa, this new music teacher is like very prompt." And then, being that my mom and dad were teachers, because they cared and brought value to the community, we were accepted. It wasn't that we moved there to extract resources. We were part of the community, and I think the quickness of acceptance is directly or correlates with how much you bring to the community and how much you're willing to be a part of it and the value that you bring to it. So I think we were accepted pretty quickly. And then my brother being a really good basketball player also helped, and me being a decent basketball player helped too. But and that's even going forward, the family or the people of the community. Whenever I go back there, they say welcome home. I live in Ketchikan now, which is a 3-hour boat ride from where I grew up. But every time I'm back there, the elders, welcome home, and I do feel totally accepted as part of the community, and I think that's a direct result of what I put into the community and what the family put into the community. And I think that's a big thing. There are people who have lived there for a while but haven't, it could be anywhere, right? They don't put much into the community. They're not part of it. They don't go to the basketball games, support the kids, do the fundraisers. So I think that people that move in, or even if you're seasonal, if you're just a guide, or you own a property and then you do charters or something like that during the summers, the more that you put into the kids and the more that you put into the community and the people, I think that's huge for being accepted and earning that status of local, even if you were born somewhere else or you moved in late.
Well, and Lee, I'm curious on your perspective too, having come from the nation of Texas. Yeah.
As far as being included, I mean, I think the accent was the hardest thing to get rid of. You had to ditch that thing quick. Yeah, I mean, I feel like only because my friends have had kids, do I feel like the amount of shit I've gotten for being a Texan has slowed down. And I think I'm at like 22 years. But yeah, I mean, definitely get razzed about it. But overall, like, I mean, that was really about it. It's funny though. I'm sure parts of Alaska are like this. Wyoming gets a little more, like area specific, which is awesome that we now have these wildlife license plates that don't give your county. But otherwise, Wyoming license plates have your county number on them. And so, like I worked in Big Piney, which is near Pinedale, for a little bit, and they hate, of course, I guess everybody down there hates Rock Springs because that was the larger population of folks. So it's like, you hate that county, or it's Gillette or Cheyenne or whatever. That Wyoming gets very territorial even within the state about people from other counties. let alone from other states.
Alaska's pretty good about that, except for Anchorage. A lot of people refer to Anchorage as like North Portland, North Seattle, or Los Anchorage. So if you don't live in Anchorage, then you're in pretty good shape. But Southeast Alaska, it's a lot more climate-wise similar to a Seattle than up north. I have some buddies in Fairbanks, and they're the ones that are dealing with, negative 15, 20, 30 degrees, and they're checking their trap lines, and it's real cold. And I'm down here, it's 40 and rainy, but there's a little bit of that too here. But as long as you're not in Anchorage, you're in pretty good shape. But I think that territorial thing is pretty consistent. I'll also say, Lee, that there was a student in my first hour class this morning who came in wearing Texas socks, and she was immediately, I wouldn't say bullied, because that's kind of it's one of those words now. But they were certainly asking why she was wearing Texas socks.
Oh yeah, man. I think that first year I had, both my parents went to Texas Tech, so I had like Texas Tech sweatshirts and stuff, and I couldn't ditch that in my accent quick enough.
Yeah. So what about being guests? You can kind of take off the biology hats now. When you go to a different state to hunt or fish, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to, knowing that when you go to a different state to hunt or fish, you're in someone else's backyard? So what are some of your personal ethics or personal practices to not be that guy or that family or that group that's coming in here to just, enjoy the resource and go home? What are some of the things that you guys practice as far as being a good guest?
Well, full disclosure, I've only ever hunted in one other state, and that was Nebraska. I was able to hunt there as a college student. That's where I went to college, and had some family. So Nebraska and Texas have a lot in common in that public land accessible to everybody. So I was kind of forced to seek out those people with a similar mindset. And then really, I very genuinely and beggingly all the time invited myself on as many hunting trips as possible with those locals. I was able to hunt deer, I was able to hunt turkeys, lots of pheasants, lots of waterfowl, quail. But for me, it was just being willing to put what I knew on the back burner and, almost humble my years of experience and let someone else be the lead. And I think if I were to successfully draw somewhere else out of state, I'm hoping again to go back because Youth Nebraska is very cheap, and my oldest will be able to hunt this year with me. But I'm hoping that I'm able to go back there with that same mindset and not only apply what I already know, but also, there are different cultures that you have to ascribe to. Was our hunting ethics series that we did, and that was a big thing that we need to remember, that societal norms are different from region to region and state to state, and that absolutely applies itself to hunting and fishing. Whether it's running bears with dogs or the idea of flossing reds when I went to Soldotna fishing kind of blew my mind. It felt essentially like I was doing educated snagging. Which in this state is a no-no. You can't snag fish. But learning that and then realizing that this is a kosher practice. It's super successful. It's an absolute blast. And I think you have to be willing to almost put aside what you know is fact and be willing to be a sponge, even if it doesn't make sense to you in the moment.
As far as snagging goes, there's a couple hatchery runs of fish that if they're out in the salt water, you can snag them like wherever. And so a couple buddies of mine from California come up, and I said, all right, so here's what we're going to use. And it looks like a small anchor. Big old treble hook with some weight in the middle. And they look at me like, wait, really? Like, is this like we can actually do this? And so from California, incredibly regulated. There's so many bad things to do. It's the single hook barbless for so much of the state that you can just throw out this this anchor and just rip it into the side of a fish and it be legal. I mean,
and encouraged.
do anything else, man. They want to go up there and they want to snag and they just want to. It's totally like lawless, but it's legal. And there's some of these outlets where the fish aren't going to be able to go up and spawn anyway. So it's part of the salmon enhancement program that allows commercial fishermen to get more fish, allows local to get more fish, and then you have these other areas that have fishing lodges and people can come up and they can catch fish. They can fly fish for them if they want, or they can regular use a spinner or a spoon or something. But you can also snag, and man, people just love that sort of, I don't know, aggressiveness or whatever. But yeah, you do that somewhere else, and they're taking your rod, your rig, your boat, your everything away from you because it's.
Could you
totally
imagine
illegal.
trying to dip net in Wyoming, Lee?
Yeah, it's definitely illegal. Yeah, I think I'm kind of like Adam. I haven't hunted too many other places, but I always think big game. I've hunted pheasants in South and North Dakota, in Kansas. We used to hunt down in Texas with family. On one of my seasonal jobs, I was in the coast of North Carolina, and I would go out to the beach, and you talk about something. I had not seen the ocean until I had gone to North Carolina out of college. So fishing the ocean was a very different concept. But I would just talk to locals on the beach, and it was interesting that North Carolina, everybody north of them was a Yankee, and anybody with the Virginia plate was guaranteed to be a Yankee. And I think it was just because they're from the city. Locals, I got to the point where I stopped talking to people from Virginia license plates, but North Carolina license plates, as long as you were nice and just explained that, like, you're just enjoying their state, just trying to figure things out. I mean, I had guys take my phone number and give me cards, and they would just text me when the fishing was good. They like give me bait. I mean, it just seemed like if you treat people like humans and you're nice and you're respectful about their place and show interest in what they're doing, that seemed to go a long ways. And I'd say that's the same with getting landowner permission for bird hunting. And I'd say that, I mean, that's even in your own state. Like, I don't think anything necessarily needs to change. I just think it's being respectful of other people's space, leave it cleaner than you found it, those kind of basic concepts, and treating people like people.
Well, and full disclosure too, Wyoming gives us a multitude of reasons a year not to leave the state to go hunting. I mean, I can knock down 2 cow elk and a bull elk in a year. I can hold a whitetail buck tag, a general deer tag, and several doe tags. I can hold a couple of pronghorn buck tags and several doe tags. I can get a bear tag. I can get a mountain lion tag, wolf tag. If I'm lucky enough, I can draw a Shiras moose or a sheep or a bighorn. The amount of hunting opportunities for a resident in the state of Wyoming can fill a calendar from the 15th of August through the 31st of December and sometimes beyond. So part of it is, I've never had a need to go anywhere else to hunt. I mean, I would love to go chase elk in the Bob Marshall or in western Colorado or eastern Idaho, but I really don't have the need to.
Mm-hmm. What about the want to? Because I think up here, I by buying my license, I get 4 deer tags and I get 2 bear tags and I get whatever other over-the-counter stuff. I'm doing an over-the-counter moose. So a resident, I could get everything I want to, but there's still part of me that wants to, see what it's like to go hunt mule deer, right, or whitetail. Always something else. So, what about that fascination with what else is out there in the other states? What do you guys got on that? What's kind of on the list?
Yeah, I mean, it'd have to be. I mean, like Adam said, it'd be fun to go hunt different habitat, but we're already so similar to Colorado, Utah, Idaho, Montana that it's kind of hard to want to go too far. Colorado does a decent job of managing. They offer some different hunts than Wyoming, like early season archery hunts, managed for trophy quality. There's those type of things. Montana hunts a little bit later. It'd almost have to be like the Alaska, I think, is always the big dream because it's so different. Like it's such a different
Well, that, or
experience.
I mean, I think you could throw in like a coastal Roosevelt or Thule elk hunt, because I do think those would be completely different. Or now where there's elk populations popping up in, along the East Coast or in the central, southeastern, Midwest areas, Kentucky, that sort of thing. I think an elk hunt in those areas would be entirely different than what we're used to or would have exposure to up here. But again, I look at whitetail deer, for example. There's how many different ways to hunt whitetail deer across this continent. Mm-hmm. You have everything from chasing them like you do elk in the mountains and you're lucky if you get a 300-yard shot, to every encounter's within 30 yards because you're sitting in a tree stand for 12 hours a day. Yeah. And everything in between. I mean, deer drives in Wisconsin still exist and are very, very much a cultural norm and a socially accepted method of harvest. And really a familial tradition when you talk to a lot of those folks. But for me, I look at that and go, yeah, I've kind of done a similar strategy for pheasants where you have a couple of blockers at the end of the field and you push an old corn row or CRP section to knock birds down, and they all flush before they hit the blockers, just like you would with deer. But that's not necessarily the experience that I'm seeking personally at this point in time, and that may be the best answer to your question, Jeff. Mm-hmm. That the experience that I seek personally for the game species that at this point in time I either have the means to pursue, or by lack of any other virtue, choose to pursue. I have yet to cross all those boxes off on my list the way I want to do things. Yeah. So, yeah, I would definitely love to. I'd love to go and chase elk, a Roosevelt, especially in the rainforests of coastal Washington. I think that would just be mind blowing because it would be nothing like I've ever seen or experienced in my life before. But I have yet to, shoot an elk out in the Red Desert, just in my own home state, and that's a completely different hunt than the southern bighorns or the eastern face of the Absarokas, or the Wyoming range. I mean, there's so much uniqueness to each one of our regional ecosystems that, yeah, that desire exists, but I think I'm still picking low-hanging fruit. Yeah. And then you throw kids into the mix and life in general, and sometimes those wants take a little bit of a back seat to what is currently available and a little more easily accessible.
Yeah. I think a lot of people lump hunters all into one category of everybody wanting to go everywhere and get like one of each, when a lot of it is just looking at territory and thinking, I want to have an adventure here. Mm-hmm. I was in Wyoming last week, and then went down into Colorado a little bit. You're looking at we saw moose in Colorado, looked at a whole bunch of pronghorn, and it's not that it's the pronghorn or the elk necessarily, it's that what I'm used to hunting doesn't exist here. And I want to have an experience in this different mountain range or in this different climate, in this different experience. And that's what's so fascinating. If there was Sitka blacktail in Wyoming, I'd want to hunt Sitka blacktail in Wyoming just because the whole program is different. And it's beautiful on a different level, and it's totally a different experience. And it's not necessarily just about getting one of each animal. It's about going to these different places and having a real visceral experience rather than something that's,
Well, and being able to do so somewhat on your own terms. And I think that's always been somewhat of a deterrent for me also. The amount, and I have nothing but respect for non-resident hunters that come from the Midwest or the West Coast that make their way to central Wyoming with the goal of chasing a pronghorn or an elk. It doesn't matter. Because the amount of time, money, effort, education that they invest into the opportunity, especially the DIY guys. You know, there's zero guarantee. I ran into 3 guys from Wisconsin 4 miles off of the trailhead last year chasing elk, and it was the first time they were out there archery hunting elk. They'd rifle hunted cows before and had some success, but they'd never archery hunted for bulls. You know, and they were on day 4 of a 7-day hunt and were whooped and absolutely elated the exact same time and had never drawn their bow once.
Nice.
And, you know, so I have that respect and I appreciate that effort. And maybe it's just because I'm lazy in that respect of going to another state, but I haven't been put in that position where it's like, oh, I feel like I've exhausted all of my options. You know, I'm personally thinking about hunting a part of the state for elk this year that I have never hunted anything like it in the past, and am kind of seeing some of those infantile stage learning curves where you're starting to gather information. And I'm talking to local biologists, and I'm talking to past biologists, and I'm talking to wardens, and, you know, anyone that'll lend me an ear and a little bit of information that I then have to sift through, but trying to learn as much as I can to see if it's worthwhile, to see if that adventure, if there is a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I do this a lot. I talk to a lot of non-residents about all kinds of different hunts. My biggest advice, I know it's like if I'm put myself in their shoes and I'm trying to go to Alaska, it seems daunting because you don't know what habitat to look for. All you know is like a hunt area. It can be daunting, but I would say, like, you need to do your research on the species you're going after. You need to do your research on the time of year you think you're going to come out, on the license itself. At least in Wyoming, well, Onyx Maps, for one, is incredibly useful. Like, if you're looking at pronghorn and you want to know why it only takes 1 point to draw that unit, look on Onyx, and there's probably not like 3 sections of public land in the whole thing. But check how many walk-in areas or HMAs there might be. Those are, you know, game and fish paid for. Hunter access. Wyoming has a hunt app that you can go on the Game and Fish website, and it's got a lot of information that you can just zoom around to different hunt areas and look at draw odds and public land and access areas, and you can do a lot of initial research there. So my biggest suggestion, if you're calling wardens and biologists, don't call with nothing, because it's very difficult to even focus you, because it's crazy how many people I will talk to that's like, I want to come antelope hunting. Okay.
You and 20,000 other people.
do you have it? Yeah. Do you have any preference points? No. All right. Well, did you look at the preference point list? Because I don't think there's a hunt area left hardly that you can draw without a point, or like that's really going to focus you. Like, you could have already focused yourself. If you have 0 points or 1 point, you could have already looked through all the hunt areas and been like, man, there's 3 hunt areas I can draw, and then gone on the map and been like, all right, this one has the most access, and then called the biologist and warden and be like, all right, I think I've narrowed it down to this. What is the access like? Is it overrun? Am I like missing the boat here? Do you know of other opportunities? But I would say, I'll stop after this, but my final bit of that is, you got to do some of it on your own. I have most folks have no problem helping you get narrowed down. But where I really start drawing the line is if you ask which side of a drainage is better. I'm not holding your hand that far. There's people that get paid bigger money than me to do that. So do your research, but at some point, I'm going to have to kick you off your training wheels and let you go.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, if I'm looking at, I was looking at the website, the Fish and Game website for Wyoming, and you have different units, or your units are based on species, where I live in unit 1, and so it gives me unit 1 for all animals within this unit. and it's so easy, and there's hardly any private land, and the private land can be accessed with permission. It's a native corporation, so you're not worried about fences or anything. So it's unbelievably simple. But I'm looking down there, and I'm looking at the difference between the units. So can you explain a little bit about why the units are divided by species rather than by?
They might, because I guess probably because a hunter didn't draw the boundaries, a biologist did. And so, which I wish we could go back in time and somehow fix that, and then it'd be fine. I do like the way things are set up, but it is incredibly complicated, and it's difficult to change what people know. So Wyoming's are very comfortable with the system we have. So that's based off of you start off at the herd unit level, and a herd unit for that particular species is based off less than 10% interchange with other herd units
In a geographical area, right?
In a geographical area, so you're trying to assume that within like whatever the bighorn elk herd, that is separate from whatever another elk herd next to it. And so but that doesn't necessarily, those boundaries don't necessarily align with the mule deer herd, because they may migrate differently. Mm-hmm. They may summer in different spots and winter in different spots. And then you throw in pronghorn, and you might have pronghorn that migrate in completely different directions. And so so you start at the herd unit level, and then with the herd unit, the hunt areas are drawn up either based on mostly access related or political boundaries. If you within that herd unit, if the northern half is almost all public, you're probably going to end up making that'll be a different hunt area than the southern half that's mostly private, to distribute your hunting pressure.
Makes sense.
So that's a brief rundown of why it's so freaking complicated. and I will admit that I know in the portions of the state we've tried to start lumping hunt areas together and make things a little bit bigger and broader. I've hunted Western Wyoming ever since we moved to Wyoming in the mid '90s, and it still blows my mind that some of those hunt areas, if you need on the Game and Fish map, if they need a pin because the hunt area number doesn't even fit inside the hunt area. It's kind of, in my opinion, a little bit of micromanaging, but I'm sure that will all change with time.
Nice. Well, guys, it's taken about almost an hour of your time there, 45 minutes. So any closing thoughts? Man, I really appreciate the different perspective and having you guys on there. It's nice to talk to some biologists. And even though there's a long distance between Wyoming and Alaska, we're partners in arms. So any closing thoughts?
I'm a little bit curious, Jeff, from your perspective as someone outside, starting to look into Wyoming and hunt possibilities, because I've always heard these third hand through someone else's recording or someone else's video, what your interpretation or what you think you might be expecting coming to this state as someone who's never hunted it before.
I think the biggest thing is I lived in California for a little bit once I graduated college, and because I didn't grow up hunting. So when I growing up in Alaska, I was just fishing all the time because I had cross country and then basketball during hunting season, so we never really did it. And my dad moved up from Colorado, and so the first black-tailed deer that he shot, I was pretty young, and it was at the bottom of a clear cut. And so he went down his clear cut, and he's packing this thing out there, and thought that was a ton of work for a very small deer compared to the whitetails that you'd get in Colorado.
Oh yeah.
So we didn't do any hunting growing up, and then in California, I finally started to get into it, and it was the small little area that I was confined to with so many tags and such a small success rate. It was daunting and almost not even worth the trouble. You had a 3-week season to go up there and hang out with just a ton of other people who are waking up at dawn, starting out drinking beer, and then it was terrifying. So now that I'm used to hunting in Alaska, and I'm looking into Laramie, or I'm looking into to Wyoming, and I'm just seeing fences, and I'm seeing, okay, where can I hunt, where can't I hunt? And I have OnX for Alaska, which has been good because it tracks the trails and whatnot. I don't have to worry too much about private property, but um, getting, and figuring out the preference points, figuring out just all the different things, and making sure I do something, or do everything right.
Yeah.
You don't want to be that guy who comes in and is like, oh, well, I'll hunt this area, and you end up on someone else's land, or you end up doing something wrong. And, you read the regs, but, they're a lot more complex than what I'm used to. It's so easy up here. But I think the simplest thing, I think the antelope, just going down there and figuring out a spot that, put in whenever the draw is due or whatever I need to do, get the preference points, and be able to hunt, a pronghorn. It just seems kind of overwhelming, I guess, to a degree, coming from such a very simple, easy, accessible spot up here. But there's a lot of opportunity, and Wyoming seems like a great place to hunt. It's not talked about a lot, so I almost feel kind of bad advocating for it and ruining it.
Yeah, it's a catch-22 that we're fully aware of the implications, both positive and negative of. I wonder, though, if all non-residents feel that way, because everyone gets used to what they're used to. Montanans are used to putting in for Montana tags. Folks from Idaho are used to putting in for Idaho tags. And when you're someone not from that state and you make that decision that, this is the year that I'm heading west, or if I'm in Wyoming, I'm going to try a Montana deer elk combination. And you start dipping into those chunks and piles of information, you are definitely drinking water from a full-on fire hose.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, you have companies like Go Hunt that have simplified it a little bit, or I think Eastman's Hunting Journal does some tag help in how to get non-residents into Western states to hunt, which might smooth out that learning curve a little bit, but. That is, I would fully agree with you. That is part of the daunting process of planning to go outside of your home state to hunt.
Yeah. Well, there's the accessibility of the tags too. There's no discrepancy in a lot of these hunts between residents and non-residents. So there are tags available for like the bison hunt in Central Alaska that, in theory, if like all those tags could go to out-of-staters or non-residents.
Yeah.
And it's so easy because you apply for that tag for bison in that area, and then you just go and hunt it. And there's no accumulation of points. It's just easy. There's a mountain goat hunt that's right in Ketchikan's backyard, and it's very limited, but there's no discrepancy between in-state, out-of-state, and so you could have. I mean, I could day hunt it. Every time I go on like just a recreational hunt, I'm seeing these huge mountain goats that are the genetics are amazing, world-class genetics, and I'm just like, well, I will never draw this tag. Some guy from Florida who just put in on his first time ends up getting it, can come up here and do it, which is it's great.
And Alaska has different rules and regulations for what hunts need to be guided and what don't, correct?
Yeah. So there's some, and some people will say that it's ridiculous because a mountain goat you have to have a guide for, but if you're hunting in the Alpine, you might see a black-tailed deer, which doesn't need a guide in the same terrain as a mountain goat. And so people will say that, well, that's ridiculous. What you're doing is you're just catering to the guide services. Well, not really, because typically your mountain goat hunt and your Dall sheep hunt and your grizzly bear hunt, you're going into some extreme remote locations. And so if you are over your head and you get into trouble, the cost of the extraction, your last podcast about, out in the wilderness and getting that aid and getting people to
having to dial 911 when you're 15 miles deep.
Yeah. So I mean, that the expense up here is no one's driving in anywhere
Yeah.
to get you out, and so
Well, yeah, in
where
Alaska, 15 miles is a short, brisk walk for some of those locations. I mean, you're talking hundreds of miles in some instances away from civilization.
yeah, and there's no getting a ground crew in there. It's all from helicopters. You can't have your volunteer squad that goes out there and searches the ground, and yeah, it's all Coast Guard or troopers in helicopters. So it's a lot more expensive. So some people think that it's guide because it's protecting the guide services when actual there's a lot of the cost of rescue thing goes into there too. But do you guys have regulations for guides, and there are certain hunts that necessitate a guide?
Well, anytime you're on wilderness in the state of Wyoming, you have to have a guide.
Okay.
And now that can be, Lee, correct me if I'm wrong if I speak out of turn on this, but that can be a resident in a complimentary guide position without getting paid, or it can be an official paid guide outfitter type deal.
Yeah, so in theory, like I could take you could come down as a non-resident, and Adam or it's just like it's paperwork that you fill out, and I think it's like as a resident you're limited to 2 people, and they have to be, there's a distance or line of sight or something. But you could come down and we could fill out that paperwork, and then you could hunt in the wilderness with us. But otherwise, it's a horseshit rule.
Well, because the irony of that is you could have been there in July in the same wilderness area fishing as a non-resident.
Oh, you can backpack it during hunting season. You just can't kill anything.
Yep.
Yeah.
The outfitter board Wyoga is very powerful when it comes to the politics in Wyoming. They just leave it at that.
But selfishly, as a resident, and I know, Lee, you've said this before in other
I
recordings.
use it to my advantage.
Absolutely use it to my advantage. I know that I can cross into Cloud Peak Wilderness and not have to worry about every Wisconsinite with that was fortunate enough to draw a non-resident elk tag, because they're not going to be up there.
Yeah. Well, I think there's nothing wrong with that either. If you live in that state, there should be some sort of benefit from living there, right? Outside of cheaper tags and whatnot. And so I fully expect hunting down in Wyoming, there's going to be some stipulations that it's unfortunate, it's going to cost more. There's rules and there's this or that, or hoops I have to jump through. But
well, to some extent, I agree with you. But to play devil's advocate on that argument, we're talking about the same national forest lands that there's a national forest in Nebraska I can go walk through and go hunt. Why can't someone from Nebraska come and hunt the same national forest that just happens to have wilderness designation in Wyoming? We're all owners of that land.
Yeah.
We all should be able to benefit from it, but every state is nuanced enough that for whatever circumstances, whether they're social, economic, political, or just cultural, have determined that those rules are set when they don't always necessarily make sense.
Yeah. It was funny, up until I think maybe 3 years ago, the tags and the license for non-residents hadn't gone up in Alaska for 10, 15, 20 years. So it was still, you could get a blacktail tag for $150
for a non-resident.
Yeah, for a non-resident, and it was just and it's still still even a lot of the tags that you can apply for. There's no discrepancy. You have the same chance as a non-resident to get it. So it was so easy, and it didn't really discriminate. So it was really that it's your land, and Alaska epitomized that attitude of, hey, come up here and do it. But I think certain states, there's just so many people, and there's so much private land, there's so many other things that go into it that some point people advocate for protecting or allowing residents to have different access or more opportunity. But it's another great thing about living in Alaska. It's pretty nice.
Well, and likewise in Wyoming.
Yeah.
I would say my one piece of advice, and this may even go Western wide, but I wouldn't build points for elk. I would get enough points to just draw a tag, especially if you're in a place that you typically do not hunt elk. Because the biggest problem is people shoot for the pie in the sky, and with point creep and just max points, you're looking at minimum 10 years to draw a tag. When you, in that 10 years, you could have hunted a general elk tag
Three
every
times?
2 to 3,
Yeah.
three, 4 times. And if you don't know what you're doing, it's not going to matter what unit you're dropped in.
Right. Yeah.
And we have really good elk hunting right now, and it's probably, you know, I would probably say that's Western wide. It's the heyday of elk. Mule deer are doing well, and they do better certain years better than other years, but overall we're dealing with like a Western wide population decline, and that's what everybody's trying to bring back from the heyday of the 60s and 70s. And I can tell you that's the heyday of elk we're currently in.
Yeah.
So people need to get out there and enjoy that. So I wouldn't build points. It's awful when guys call and they have 6 points. It's like, what do you do? And it's like, get a general tag that took you 2 points or 3 points, and just stop building because you're just chasing it. Deer, I think there's a lot of good opportunity in Wyoming. Very, you know, especially if you've never hunted mule deer. I once again, I don't know if I'd go chase pie in the sky units. There's a lot of units that you can draw without a point or with a point that you're going to have a really good mule deer hunt. And, you know, and a lot of the good, or the guys out there that kill big mule deer, they're, you know, like, I guess I won't say any names necessarily, but it's units you can hunt more often and learn the country, because that has more to do with it than the number of deer on the landscape.
Yeah.
There's certain areas that are going to produce monsters like Western Wyoming, but at the same time, like, it doesn't matter if you're only going to hunt it every 5 to 10 years. You kind of need to learn the country of an area, and then you'll find big deer. Pronghorn, Wyoming is very split in half on its public land versus private land. Western side of the state, heavily public land, especially when you get into BLM pronghorn country. And that's where all your hard to draw units are going to be typically, because almost all of the hunt area is public land. The further east you go, the easier the tags, because there is a lack of access. With onyx and like a lot of walk-in areas, there's plenty of still prime pronghorn units that take a few less points, if not just a point.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last confusing part is we do have a special, and the special, I don't know how it came about, but it's basically you pay a little bit more for better draws. It's not always true, but there is a lot of units, if you don't have any points and you're willing to pay almost twice the price for the license, you can skip ahead a couple years and draw it that year.
Interesting.
That's my spiel, I guess.
And thankfully, as a resident of Wyoming, I'm so glad I don't have to worry about that. You know, I put in for an elk area or a deer area, and if I don't draw that, I get a general over the counter. And our general units in this state, whether it's deer or elk, are just as productive, if not more so in some circumstances, than those limited draw areas are. Mm-hmm. So as residents of this state, I fully recognize how spoiled we are from an opportunity standpoint. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, the moose hunt that I'm doing is a bow hunt over the counter, and it's no special draw tag or anything like that. You just go over the counter and get it, and the biggest cost is going to be me getting up there. My buddy has a drift boat or a jet boat, so we're going to go up to this river and do this. And the population of brown bear is so great there that you can get to without needing a harvest ticket. So, I mean, this could just be an absolute bonanza of opportunity. And
you can get 2 brown bear tags on top of your moose tag?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, it's just in some areas it's difficult to get. There's a really good population of brown bear on Admiralty Island.
Okay.
And that's one, if you draw it, it's one every 4 years that you can get it again. But there are some areas where, you know, as a resident, there's over-the-counter tags. So I could leave my black bear and blacktail area of Alaska, head up north, and it's over-the-counter caribou, over-the-counter moose, over-the-counter, as much. I'm essentially chartering an Alaska Airlines flight to get all the meat back, but as far as whatever I want to do hunt-wise, man, it's just crazy.
Does that same opportunity apply for non-residents, or is that just a residential benefit?
There are a lot of. I'm getting out the regs right here, but a lot of it is an over-the-counter. So let me get to this spot right here. I'm not going to say what unit it is, but non-resident. There's a ticket. Non-resident. Yeah, for sheep, it's also a harvest ticket. You can get a Doll sheep harvest ticket. You don't have to draw it, but you're going to have to get a guide. Non-resident moose. Like some of these spots, and it's finding that right hunt.
Yeah.
Flipping through and finding that spot to where it might be a little bit more difficult to get to, but you don't maybe necessarily have to take a super cub into that area. But yeah, there's some good stuff there if you do some research. But I think it's knowing what to look for, knowing what to do. In the same case that Wyoming makes sense for you and knowing what to do and look for. Same thing with Alaska. Once you're familiar with the guidelines and how they work, then you can figure stuff out.
And I imagine that's probably pretty universal across all Western states, though. I mean, you see some of these YouTube hunters, Instagram hunters that are hunting multiple states every year, and they're playing by the same rules that everyone else is. They've just got some part of that figured out a little quicker or better than the rest of us, or using some of those platforms like Go Hunt to help them get through that, to navigate some of that mud that clouds the beginning of that process.
Yeah, I'm looking at the unit that I'm going for that moose hunt, and it's for both residents and non-residents. It's a harvest ticket, no closed season, 3 bears for black bear. It's no closed season, doesn't even say you need a harvest ticket or a permit for grizzly bear, brown bear, 2 bears every regulatory year, no closed season. Harvest ticket for caribou, no permit, and then moose, harvest ticket. So, I mean, this is...
Well, we may have to talk off air, Jeff.
Stop recording here, and then we'll...
we'll fine-tune some things.
Yeah. So...
Which I'm sure my wife will be very, very happy that we've had this conversation when I tell her, guess what I figured out?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, too. The people with the inside knowledge, man. And that's the nice thing about not having rivalries between states and opening up your mind to other people. Like you can have, like we don't have, the more infighting we do as hunters and anglers, the more damage we do because we're not unified. And you're an outsider, and so I don't like you as a hunter. When there's a social movement that says that hunting is no longer socially acceptable. So the more that we're on the same page, the more that we can enjoy, all the bounty that the country has.
Well, and I agree with you. We're notorious for eating our own, whether it's trad bows versus compounds, or compounds versus crossbows, or flintlocks versus, sabbated rifled muzzle loaders. I mean, you name it, we can find reasons to fight amongst each other. Yeah. But having that conversation, similar to what we're doing, a dude from Alaska talking to a couple of dudes from Wyoming, and you start to find out that, if you're just willing to ask and have an invested conversation and do so from a genuine place, not from some place that's self-serving or self-aggrandizing, but do so from a place of, man, I really have a desire to see what this experience is like. And success doesn't mean that I've got a $4,000 taxidermy bill at the end of it, but success means that I get to go home and say, I got to hunt the Wyoming range in Wyoming, or I got to hunt the Brooks range in Alaska. Being able to have those stories and defining that experience based off of the experience itself rather than the harvest of an animal, I think is really where the that conversation opens itself up.
Right. Well, that's a good ender, man. It's a good closer. Anything else for you, Adam or Lee?
I appreciate you having us on.
Yeah, good to have you on. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good. And yeah, give me a shout if you need some help figuring out what you need to do.
Well, and when you find yourself down in Laradice this summer, we'll have to have you on our show likewise, and we'll talk all things Alaska.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk some off the record stuff here.
100%.
Well, where can people find you on give the website, give the pitch for the podcast and all that?
The website is righttoromepodcast.com. We are on Instagram, I believe at right_2_Rome_. That could be wrong, but if you type in Right to Rome Podcast, you're going to find us. Facebook, same thing. I know we have a Twitter account that basically just posts our episodes. I don't think any of us are active on Twitter.
No.
But mostly the website and Instagram seem to be our two big ones. We do have a YouTube channel. It is populated with one episode at this point. We're really slow to that game. But we're not much on the video side of things at this point. So as this is our hobby job.
Well, awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye.
Thank you.